everyone. Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm here with another client interview for you guys today. I'm excited to have Pavan on with us today. And Pavan just finished his summer 2022 recruiting process recently. And so I wanted to get him on here to talk to you guys about how it went for him, share some tips and advice, and just whatever thoughts he may have about the process for those of you who are currently still going through recruiting. We're about to go through recruiting. So, Pavan, thank you for taking the time to come on here and talk to us today.
Yeah, no problem, Sam.
And to start off, if you don't mind, maybe just introduce yourself a little bit so that people kind of get a sense for who you are.
Definitely. Yep. So, like Sam said, I'm Pavan. I'm currently a rising senior studying statistics and finance at Case Western. I'll also be entering into the Master's in Finance program at Case. So effectively, I went through the 2022 recruiting process as a sophomore.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. And, it's interesting because you just mentioned you're doing a Master's in Finance. We'd love to talk about that a little bit since I know Masters in Finance, they're pretty popular in Europe, I think, but at least in the States, it's a relatively newer thing for most people.
Yep.
Like a lot of people know about the MBA, but not the
Yep.
Masters in Finance. Can you talk a little bit about your decision or like how you decided to kind of go out and get a Master's in Finance after you graduate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a couple of things at play in that decision. But the biggest thing was basically I was interested in investment banking. In my freshman year, I was studying pre-med, but had swapped out. So I basically sort of lost out on a year of learning about finance and even more so investment banking. So I came a little bit late into the game. And so that Master's in Finance really serves sort of two purposes. The first is to get a little bit more background and experience in the sort of theoretical side, academic side of things. But I think for me, the most important thing was that it gave me an extra chance to go through a recruiting process and break into investment banking.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Basically, you kind of reset, and since you missed out that first year, and this is so common nowadays, right? Where
Yeah.
junior summer internship recruiting happens so early, pretty much, halfway through sophomore year is when recruiting starts. And if you weren't born into this world knowing that you want to do investment banking, a lot of times by the time you even realize what banking is, you're kind of behind, and it can be hard to come back from that, right? And so taking on a Master's in Finance programs, just so people know, most of them are 1-year programs instead of 2 years, right?
It's 1 to 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and so as opposed to MBA, which are mostly 2 years, you can find a 1-year program. So you're going for school for 5 years instead of 4. And then I think the other benefit of an MSF, based on my understanding, is you can kind of add it on as a 5th year to your undergrad immediately without having to, like for most top MBA programs, you have to go out, work for a couple of years first, get some real world experience before the top MBA programs will accept you. But then that obviously pushes things out way, way, way down the road, right?
Right.
Okay, cool. And I guess the last piece of information for people about the Master's in Finance before I move on is, I think if you do a Master's in Finance program, unlike the MBA program, when you recruit for banking, you're still recruiting for an analyst position, or you're going in as an analyst as opposed to at the MBA level, you're going in as an associate, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, for those of you that are listening, this is potentially a good way, like Pavan said, if you're kind of late to recruiting for whatever reason, and you want to kind of reset the clock or, go back a year, this could be one thing to consider, right? The other thing that I've seen people do is they might delay their graduation by a semester or by a year, and that kind of has the same effect. So Obviously, with this, you get an extra degree. So there's the
Yep.
pros and cons. Cool. So take us back to kind of like the beginning. I mean, when did you realize? But it sounds like you realized your sophomore year that you wanted to do banking as opposed to pre-med. Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's more or less what happened. So, yeah, like I mentioned, freshman year was pre-med. Towards the back end of it, I realized that I didn't want to go into medicine. So over the summer, sort of transitioned over with an internship that was sort of in the middle. Caught is a nice little hybrid between medicine and business. But at that point, I was starting to look more into the business and finance world to see what career options were out there. And by the start of my sophomore year, I was kind of full force trying to make things happen
Got
in
it.
terms of breaking into investment banking.
Got it. Okay. And so what were you doing for your recruiting? Like once you found out,
Yeah,
how did you go about it on your own in terms of preparation and figuring out how to break in? And were there a lot of other students from Case Western who also were trying to get into banking or have gone into banking, or what was the environment like for you?
yeah. No, that's a good question. So case is definitely, I would say, non-target. We are doing better in the most recent years about getting a stronger presence in the middle market, but overall, we're still a non-target. So we send when I was starting this process, we were probably sending maybe 2 to 3 people a year into IB, and really maybe one person that was actually like hitting, a bulge bracket or elite boutique. But for the most part, it's just middle market.
Yeah,
So the process was relatively, it was very difficult for me to understand the landscape.
yeah,
I knew that I needed to network, but in terms of how to actually do that, it took a while before I understood the process. And even then, it was still very uncomfortable. I'm sure, as many people can attest to, when you first started off, it's a little bit uncomfortable to be doing cold calls and all that type of stuff.
yeah,
But even more so from a non-target where you really are trying to figure things out more or less alone.
yeah. Got it. So it sounds like 2 to 3 people per year into banking, which is not a lot. How big is your class at Case Western, brother? Like how big is the school?
Yeah, so the school I believe is about 5,000, maybe 5,500 students in total, or as the undergrad class. So a
Across
little bit over across the 4 years. Yeah, so around 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000 students per class size. Yeah,
Okay, so it's a pretty small school basically.
yeah.
Got it. Okay, so you're coming from a small non-target school, not a lot of people going to banking every year.
Yep.
Probably not a whole lot of alumni you can reach out to on Wall Street either. Uh,
Right. Yep.
okay, so then like what did you do then? Like starting out, you're trying to figure this out, trying to get the lay of the land. You knew you needed to network, but you don't really know how to go about it. And there's not like really like a built-in network. It's not like you go to a Wharton or a Harvard or
Yeah.
something like that. So what were some of the things that you tried?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing was I didn't fully understand the importance of like networking until a little bit later on. And so I thought that I could sort of get by on technical merits. So joined a few of the investment clubs at Case, and tried to just get familiar with sort of the process of pitching and understanding how like DCFs, sort of the mechanics of different financial modeling techniques worked. So for myself, I think that I was better I was further ahead in terms of my technical prowess than knowing anybody in the industry. By the time that I was uh, sort of cold calling and cold emailing people, I had a rough list of sort of questions that I wanted to ask those professionals. But it was, like I said, it was rough. I had a very the transition between questions was not very fluid, and oftentimes I felt like the conversation went okay, but not very great. And looking back on the conversations that I had this past year, and even over the summer following my sophomore year, I can look back on those sophomore year conversations and say that they did not go as well as they had more recently.
Mm, got it. Okay. Um, that's an interesting point that you bring up because I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this right now and they're probably in that same boat where they've been trying to network. They are asking, this list of questions that they kind of prepared ahead of time or that they think they're supposed to be asking. And a lot of these conversations just feel like they're okay or kind of mediocre and don't
Yeah.
really know where it's going. What changed for you? Like it sounds like you were able to turn it around and get better at having these conversations, but like was that like a change in approach or a change in
Yeah.
mindset or what did you do exactly to kind of flip the switch?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. So the first thing, and I think maybe depending on how you look on it, either the easiest or the hardest thing is sort of credentials. Coming off my freshman year, I only had things related to medicine, things that were not at all relevant to or things that would not stand out to a finance professional. And so over the course of my sophomore and junior years, I was able to add more things that were relevant. So internships at a private equity shop, internships at a wealth management shop. So things that could at least catch some interest if the person that I was emailing or trying to talk to opened my resume. They could at least see that, maybe I knew what I was talking about, maybe I was showing some interest.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. Um, I think the two bigger things though were, there was a change in mindset and there was a sort of a change in approach. So the change in mindset was going from someone who was just trying to understand and like feel things out to kind of bumping around in the dark and trying to ask questions that were very broad and vague. And then that developed into trying to ask more sort of directed questions, asking more about the professionals and trying to understand their actual experience rather than just trying to learn about how things fit together in the finance world. So that was one thing. I guess it was just a difference in confidence in what I was looking for.
Mm,
And then the second thing, and the thing that I would say was probably the most impactful in sort of making conversations go my way, was towards the end, always making sure to ask for something, make an ask, not just be on a call and just be asking random questions about like information, but finishing up the call with some sort of meaningful, trying to get something out of the conversation. So I'm sure the students that join your program will hear it a bunch, but always asking for additional names, always asking for maybe a resume to get pushed, something like that. And that was the biggest difference in approach, really making sure your name stuck with the person you were talking to,
yeah.
and then having something to sort of follow up on later on when you wanted to reach out to them again when it was actually more important.
Yeah. That's really, really great advice, by the way. So hopefully you guys are all paying attention. But uh, I think the things that you kind of talked about just now, though, they're also kind of all related, right? Because, you talk
Yeah,
about, a lot of people don't think about it, by the way, but you first talked about, when you said what helped you improve your network, and the first thing you talked about was your credentials. And people
yeah,
don't typically even think about that, right? People think like, oh, I need a better resume so that, I can apply and get more interviews. But in reality, it's very rare, especially with the top banks, that you're going to apply and just have your resume selected because you have such an amazing resume, because they get way
right,
too many amazing resumes, right? And so really having the real benefit of having a better resume is that people are going to be more inclined to talk to you versus
yep,
when you had just a bunch of medicine stuff on there. When you reach out, people are probably like, I'm kind of busy. Like, I don't know if I, have time to talk to this kid who seems to have nothing to do with finance, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
but also, like, even you talking about making an ask in the end. Well, at the end of the day, you can make an ask all you want, but if they don't feel like you're qualified, um, it doesn't matter how much they like you. Like, nobody wants to stick their neck out for someone who, again, looks like crap on paper or is going to be a hard sell to the firm. Like, hey, you should totally talk to this guy, even though
Yeah.
he goes to a non-target school and has no relevant experience whatsoever. Like, nobody wants to be that guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And so you have to make it easy for them to do what you want them to do, or else if you're just coming out and making all these demands or requests, all it's going to do is make things awkward, right?
Yeah.
Because people hate saying no. So if you make an ask and they don't want to do it, or if you ask it not in the right way, um, they're basically gonna have to either make things awkward and say no, or kind of like jujitsu their way out of it, or
Yeah.
gonna have to uh, just lie to your face and say, yeah, sure, send me your resume and I'll pass it along to whoever, and then they just do nothing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was one thing that was, good about your program. This might be a little bit long-winded, but I'll get to the point eventually. Um, yeah, when you're not well qualified, then those professionals that you speak to are kind of, they're either going to say no outright, or what I found more often was they'll try and sort of, back out of it, be relatively polite, but, end up having the conversation go nowhere. But the thing is, even if you go to a target school, even if, you're coming in with some good credentials, you do have to go through that awkward first step of networking where you're going to get way more rejections than you are later on. And so the point of this was that something that was beneficial with your program is that, you're joining, or yeah, you're joining a community of a lot of people that are like-minded, and everybody's sort of on top of each other and trying to push each other to, get, 5 networking call, 5, 10, whatever, however many networking calls done a week, so you can get past that high rejection rate point of the networking and really get into the more quality conversations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think cannot overstate the impact of being in the right community and being in the right group, or surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals, right? Especially coming from a school that's only sending, 2 or 3 students in the banking each year. It's like, who are you supposed to talk to about this stuff, And,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
sometimes recruiting can feel very, very lonely, right? Like, it's
Yep.
such a grind, and you're going through the process and reaching out to all these bankers, and you're actually, like, you're either not getting responses, you're getting ghosted, or you're getting responses and the conversation's going nowhere. It just sucks to go through it alone, and seeing other people around you who are kind of doing the same thing. And not only that, but they're doing well at it, and you know that, hey, these guys are doing it, and I'm following the exact same steps and same processes as they are. I think inherently it just gives you more confidence that, hey, like, I'm on the right track, right? And
Yep.
that can make a huge difference for just your mindset and your mentality, right? And even just your confidence. So I think
Yep.
that's a great point. Um, on the note of kind of like credentials and making yourself more qualified, um, so obviously I think you joined Welsh Mastermind back in like October of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. I think,
Yeah. I think that sounds about right.
yeah, right around there, I think so. Um, then I think since you joined, after you joined, um, I think the first internship you got after joining was the private equity internship that you did, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. And so that obviously helped a ton. Um, and like, what how big is that PE fund? Do you know?
I believe it's 5.5 billion assets under management.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's
So
about right because I mean they've been Riverside, they've been around for a long time. I think they've been
yeah,
around for well, I don't know, decades at least, right?
yeah, yeah,
In fact,
exactly.
looking at their website, they have 30 plus years of experience, more than 650 investments made. Okay, so pretty strong track record. Um, People are probably wondering though, how were you able to get an internship during the school year at such a solid private equity firm coming from like a non-target school? Like, was there something magical that you did there, or what was
Yeah.
the approach there?
So I mean, this is that it just really has to do with leveraging what networks exist. So the way that I was able to land that internship was that there's a professor at Case Western who um, has been around in the finance world. He started his career at Morgan Stanley, ended up being a vice president there, left to join a private equity firm, not Riverside, but some other firm before retiring. And now he's currently teaching, as well as he's on he's on the board for a number of different private companies. So he has a lot of connections. And the way that I got Riverside was just by pretty much asking him, showing that I was a pretty strong student in his classes, staying attentive, and then using that avenue to enter into it. So it's just about keeping your eyes open and knowing what avenues for success there are within whatever community you're in. Exactly what we've been saying throughout this call. Case is pretty small. There's not a whole lot of presence on Wall Street or anywhere else. But Riverside's headquarters are in Cleveland, and so you got to just know where to roll the dice.
Yep.
I didn't make many plays for New York offices in this recruiting cycle or in my previous recruiting cycle. So it's just about knowing where to look.
Yep. Yeah. And I think the biggest takeaway I have there though is really like thinking outside the box on how you network and who you network with, right? Because I think one of the first things we talk about when it comes to networking in our program, at least, is how do you widen the top of your funnel, right? And
Yeah,
I think everybody out there, most of the time when they're thinking about networking, everyone's like, oh, let me just reach out to alumni on LinkedIn. So everyone's doing
right,
it, right? Well, what the hell do you do if you go to a school that doesn't have that many alumni? Then you're going to be done in like a day if you just all you're
yeah,
doing is reaching out to alumni on LinkedIn. So obviously, to widen the top funnel, we go through like the brainstorming exercise where there's like probably 40 plus different things that we listed out. It's like, what about this? What about this? What about this? What
yeah,
about this? And like obviously going to your professor, that's one of the things that you could do that most students just aren't even doing, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so that's awesome that you're able to do that. And so once you join Wall Street Mastermind, so because I mean, you finished recruiting. We're in June now, but you finished recruiting probably in like April. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I've
And
already forgotten when I got the offer, but yeah, I think towards the end of April it sounds about right.
yeah, I mean, you got a couple offers, but I think your last offer was probably, I want to say like April or something. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
so it's kind of like I would say like a 6 month period where
hmm
from the time you join Wall Street National until you finish recruiting. But like, what were you doing inside of Wall Street Mastermind during those 6 months? And like, can you just kind of walk people through that at a high level? We don't have to get like super into the weeds, but what were you doing and like what really changed for you, I guess? Like what was the difference between what you were doing on your own before and what you did after? And actually maybe even before that, like what made you even want to join back in October when you first
sure.
kind of connected with us?
Yeah, yeah. So um, I'll answer that question, those set of questions sort of in reverse. I'll start off with the why I even joined. Um, the reason that I joined was because I had gone through the recruiting process to try and get a position for summer of 2021, and it went very poorly. Um, I basically had one interview with KeyBank in Cleveland, and I did not receive an offer. So I was basically a little bit panicked and just trying to figure out ways to actually make it happen. And thankfully, I saw a post from Sam related to Wall Street Mastermind. I saw that a few people that I knew were putting their names in the comments to be sort of reviewed. And I put my name down and followed up with Sam, and here we are now. But yeah, that was the catalyst, basically being unsuccessful in a process where I thought I had done well.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess on that note though, so you saw it's probably like a post on LinkedIn or something, and then
yeah,
you reached out, we connected. You spoke to someone on the team. I think you spoke to Jen in the beginning, if I'm not mistaken. But,
yep.
Obviously, though, like as you talk to us and you're evaluating this program as something that may or may not be able to help you. I mean, God knows there's so many programs out there nowadays
Yeah.
that potentially help you get into investment banking. Some are great, and some are honestly, a lot of them are not so good, right? And so, how do you know if this is actually a program that's going to help you, or how like what gave you the confidence that yeah, this I think could work, or will most likely. I mean, obviously nothing's 100%, nothing's guaranteed, but like, what gave you that confidence as opposed to saying like, oh, this is just another, I don't know, washed up banker who's peddle, peddle
yeah.
invalid advice to college students.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll be really honest here. A lot of the information, I mean, you can find online. But the thing that really gave me the confidence about what was the differentiating factor was actually speaking initially with Jen. I believe she also came from a non-target, and she got into, I don't remember where, but it was a pretty good PGT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So very solid bank. So I could sort of see myself in her shoes, non-target to a strong bank. And that was really what gave me the confidence. It's very easy to sort of, or it's hard to see non-target. It's very difficult to view non-targets getting into prestigious banks. You see just tons of posts saying it's very difficult. You can do it, but you have to put in, a whole lot of work. And that's true. I had to do that. I'm sure Jen also had to do it, but it's a different experience reading it online and all that, but then, actually talking to the person. So that's what gave me the confidence. Over time, actually being in the program, seeing the number of bankers that were actually helping out, just sort of verified my presence in the program.
Yeah.
But that was the initial thing, being able to actually talk to people that were in the same position as me.
Got it. Yeah, and I mean, for our listeners who don't have the context, Jen also went through the program prior to Pavan, and like you said, came from a non-target and was able to get into PJT, which is an elite boutique and very hard to get into. And a very similar story. Like came into a sophomore year, didn't have any finance experience, had to build up her credentials. So I think there were like a lot of similarities there. And so obviously being able to see someone else do it gives you more belief that you can do it, which again just goes back to the point we made earlier about being in the right environment and kind of,
Yep.
I mean, honestly, this is the other thing. Like nowadays, where do most people get their information about investment banking recruiting? I would say Wall Street Oasis, right?
Yeah.
But I gotta be honest, like I've been on those forums, like it can be a toxic environment on there, right? Meaning like, especially for a non-target school kid, there's just a lot of doubts because a lot of the students and even people who aren't students on there will have you believe that, oh, if you don't go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, or Wharton, then you don't have a 4.0 GPA and have like 3 investment banking issues already, then you pretty much have no chance, right? Or like
right.
that's like the line of thinking, or it's like Goldman Sachs or bust. Like if you don't go get into a Goldman, then it's not even a real bank, or whatever.
Right.
It's just like you can immerse yourself in that and just have all these negative thoughts that aren't really helping you at all. Or like if you're in the right environment and it's other people who are similar to you and have all those obstacles, and other people who have also been told that they can't do this stuff, yet they still did it. It's just that's a very positive thing, or it can be a very positive thing for you because now you have a frame of reference and you have that belief, right? And a lot of
Yep.
times, like being able to do something starts with the belief. Like if you believe you can, you're probably right. But if you believe you can't, you're probably also right, right? And it's like
Yeah.
that's half the battle. And so, I think it seems like a small thing there, but I just really want to emphasize like it's like, yeah, we have so many successful uh, case studies inside of Wall Street Mastermind I've read already of people who just overcame supposedly impossible odds that it's no longer really a thing anymore, right? And
Yep.
and, I, and by the way, don't get me wrong. I'm not even saying that the people on Wall Street Oasis are being malicious intentionally. I don't think they are. I just think that when people say what they say online or just in general, most people are just talking about their own experience, right? Most people are they're telling you what they believe to be true through their lens, through their view of the world. And in their world, they don't know anyone who came from a small non-target school who successfully broke into investment banking. So that's why they're telling you it's impossible. But
Yep.
that doesn't mean that no one's ever done it. It just means that they're not in that corner of the world. And you got to figure out how you can put yourself in the right corner where there's a lot of people doing what you're trying to do, and that way like you have the right view of like what reality actually is, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think that's super important, man. And so okay, so that's what kind of gave you the confidence to join, is you through your
Yep.
conversation with Jen. So that makes a lot of sense. And then I guess coming back to the other question, like what was different once you joined Wall Street Mastermind? Because like one common question that a lot of people have is like, well, why can't I just do this on my own? Like, I mean, what are you guys doing that's so different? Isn't everything already on Google or on Wall Street Oasis or on, I don't know, Mergers and Inquisitions? Like, I could just find everything on my own, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why invest in something like this?
Yeah. So to those people, I mean, it's already a very difficult process, even more time consuming if you're from a non-targets. And if you really want to do that, go for it. It is possible to do everything on your own. But I'd say the biggest things that the biggest benefits for me joining Wall Street Mastermind were two things. The first thing was just having a group of people that were monitoring every single application that ever got posted instantly. So there was no ambiguity about timelines. You kind of knew exactly when everything was coming out, when to start networking more directly and asking for resumes to be pushed, and things like that. And that's just a huge time saver on your end when you're trying to focus on networking, building connections, and actually, practice technicals, all those things. So that was one of the biggest things, just being able to save time on that front. The other thing, which was the biggest value add, was again having finance professionals, ex-bankers, and people that had experience in the area talk to you every week, set up these office hours, and pretty much coach you through how you need to say things when you're talking to other finance professionals, either when you're networking or even when you're interviewing. Um, I would say that I knew a decent amount about in terms of behaviorals and in terms of technicals before entering the program, but I was running into mistakes in terms of delivery. And that's where the biggest benefit was, because I came from Case or because I'm at Case, even if I set up mock interviews with, our career development department, or, even with other people that had gotten offers, and I go through my answers, sometimes the feedback that they give is still like incorrect, you know? Not to say that the answers are wrong, but just the way that they're said. So that was the biggest help in terms of the actual way that I went about improving on my answers in the interviews and as well as in actual conversations.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point because you're right. A lot of people naturally their first reaction is like, well, let me go to career center or let me ask an upperclassman to help me, right? And obviously you should do that. There's no conflict there. I'm not saying, oh, if you do all three
Yeah.
and don't do the other, you should leverage all the resources that you have. But on your point about delivery though, I want to make sure people understand what that means because we always say uh, it's not just people are so focused on like what you say, but it's not just about what you say. It's about more importantly how you say it. Right? Like
Yeah.
two different people can try to say the exact same thing, and one person can just sound so much better.
Hmm.
And that's all your interviewer is going to remember is like not even what you actually said, but just how you make them feel when you said whatever you said. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's
I think I like to point to like sort of, and this is looking at the technicals, but my delivery of like walk me through a DCF is probably one of the biggest things that changed. So in my first recruiting cycle, I started with, forecast out whatever amount of time, and then I'd go into really too much detail, for lack of a better word. And then after going through the program and understanding what I actually need to say, it was much more condensed and gave the interviewer more room to sort of have a conversation. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's just one example of how delivery changes for the better.
And I mean, in case people are wondering how we do that, it's like, yes, we do teach you all the technical concepts you need to know. For example, like what is a DCF? How does it work and all that? So obviously first, before you can explain everything, you need to have an understanding of how everything works. But also, we actually have like mock interview exercises within our modules where of course you're trying to answer these questions to see if you actually retain the knowledge that we just try to teach you, but also you can then compare your answers to like our recorded answers, which are like kind of the ideal answers, right? For how a
Yep.
banker would answer these types of questions. And so you're not just trying to come up with these answers on your own, trying to figure it out, but you can basically compare and contrast. This is how I've been answering it. This is how Sam answered it. Right? He's
Right.
asking, like, what is the difference? And in the case of the DCF, it was probably like, oh wow, Sam's answer was a lot more concise. Okay, but like
Yep.
having something like that to model your answers after, I mean, your career center is not going to give you that, right?
Yeah.
And your upperclassmen, maybe not, but really, I would venture to say your upperclassmen probably wasn't even that much more knowledgeable than you were. Like they're just, one slight step ahead of you. They were 1 year older. They went through recruiting once, right? And it wasn't like
Yep.
they were super experienced. And so, but having something to emulate, that's how you're able to identify what you should be changing. Because a lot of times you're like, well, can I figure everything out on my own? Yeah, you can, but usually when you do that, it's really hard to identify what you're doing wrong or what areas you still need to improve in. Because heck, if you could do that, then you wouldn't be delivering your answer that way in the first place, right? It wasn't like
Right.
last year when you were going through recruiting, you were trying to, not give the best answer you can, right? And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that's true on the technical side, but it's probably even more true on the behavioral side, right? Because on the behavioral
Yeah.
side, there isn't even a standard answer where it's like, hey, if you say X, Y, and Z things, then it's a good answer. Like everybody's answer is different. So
Exactly.
when you come up with your stories, how are you supposed to know if that story is what the bankers want to hear? It's just, to a lot of people, it seems so subjective, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so on the behavioral side, like what what do we do exactly in the program that you felt was helpful?
Yeah. So in terms of the behaviorals, it's just about the biggest thing is sort of creating this sort of roadmap. I don't know if that's the best word for it, but even though everybody's story is unique, um, there are things that sort of stand out to whoever you're talking to. And you want to make those things be more pronounced. I think one thing that changed over time with my delivery was sort of I had the order of things mixed up. So previously, I was saying things like I had this experience, and it showed that I was interested in this thing, right? And um, we flipped the order, and that got a lot more positive results. Basically, saying I had this interest, and so I sought out this opportunity, and now I got that opportunity, and so I was able to excel in that fashion, right? So it was just these small things that you're tweaking that, like, when you're building your answers on your own, you'll have all of the things that you're going to say or that you want to talk about, and they're going to be there, right? And it won't change all that much over time. The actual content won't change that much, but just slight delivery changes and how you present your story will have a dramatically improved impact on the person that's listening to it.
Mm.
Because nobody wants to hear a laundry list of like, oh, I did this, I did this, I did this. People want to hear a story, and so creating that story that's actually intriguing is it's much more difficult than it might seem at the onset.
Right. I think you made a really good distinction there about content and delivery. Once again, I think a lot of times we find in our experience, having worked with hundreds of students, the one thing in investment banking and trading that most people feel like they don't need that much help in is on their behavioral answers. People always think, oh, I need a lot of help on technicals. Oh my God, I need help on networking. Like I don't know how to get referrals. Oh, I need help with resume and getting more relevant experience. And when you ask about behaviorals, everyone's like, oh no, I'm pretty good on behaviorals. Like I know what I'm going to say, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Of course, you know what you're going to say because you know what you've done in the past, and those are the things that you're going to be talking about. But that's not the point. The
yeah,
point is, how do you talk about the things that you've done in a way that is actually compelling to the investment bankers? And to your point, sometimes that's like ordering things the right way, like sequencing matters. I always say it's like if you're baking a cake, you can have all the right ingredients, but if you don't put them in the right order that the recipe tells you to put it in, your bake is probably not going to come out right. Right.
yeah,
But also, some other examples might be like, what not even just what to talk about, but what not to talk about, right? Because
yeah,
sometimes people tend to ramble or they include too much detail, but they don't know they're doing that. But you
yep,
won't know you're doing that unless someone else who has interviewed a lot of candidates tells you like, hey, nobody cares about this. Kind of like
right,
cut this part out. Or sometimes you say too little and you're like, you just touch on something and you feel like that's enough. But you need someone who's done a lot of interviews to tell you like, hey, they're gonna want to know more about this. Like you gotta
yep,
elaborate more on this, right? And so, and of course, once in a while too, it's just like, no, you're using the wrong story, period. Like, what is
yeah,
your greatest weakness? And you said, oh, my greatest weakness is I have too much attention to detail, or I'm such a perfectionist. And then you need
right,
somebody like, yo, that's a bullshit weakness. Like,
yeah, yeah,
no one's gonna buy that, right? And so there's a lot of things that are kind of nuanced that can actually, go wrong with your behavioral answers, even if to you it may seem like nothing's wrong with it, right? And that's where having an expert opinion and someone who's not yourself, but a third party who can identify your blind spots for you, that's the biggest difference between
yeah.
getting our help versus doing it on your own, right?
Yeah, and I think it just comes back to how like competitive it is to break in, right? So you can find all this information about like the very obvious landmines, like saying, a BS weakness. Those are things that you can see online, and it's like, oh, now I know to never do that. I think a lot of people like sort of inherently know that that's not a smart decision to make. But if you ever had any doubts, then there's lots of resources online that'll tell you not to. But there's far less resources telling you about sort of small details and how to adjust your answers to get the best result possible.
Yeah, and I mean, like the online resources, they're more one size fits all. Like they're not personalized. No article you find is gonna say, by the way, Pavan, your story specifically, this part needs to change in this way. They don't know what your story is, right? Like you gotta be able to talk to a human being to figure that out. And not just any human being, but like someone who's qualified and also is willing to spend the time to actually take a fine comb through everything you're saying, right? Which is kind of what we do. So that makes a ton of sense, man. I guess all in all, it sounds like a lot of things ended up changing. I mean, your networking approach changed. You became more qualified on paper. You got relevant internships. You changed your delivery in terms of how you answer interview questions, technicals, behaviorals. And so those are kind of like the main components to being more successful in recruiting. And so can we kind of just let the cat out of the bag? Like what ultimately in the end, like, I guess first thing, how many offers did you end up getting in this second go around?
Yep. So I ended up getting 2 offers this time around. One from KeyBank in the group that originally rejected me last year, interviewed again this year and got their offer this time around. So that was interesting. And then I also got an offer from Guggenheim. So I accepted the offer from Guggenheim.
Right. That must have felt good to be able to reject the people that rejected you last year.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think too much about it. It was just a matter of fits.
I was totally kidding.
No bad blood there.
I was totally kidding, but like sometimes some people have not you, but sometimes some people have like a chip on their shoulder and like, I'm gonna stick it to these guys. But no, I mean, like obviously picking Guggenheim over KeyBank is nothing personal. It's just like Guggenheim is the more it's the better bank, right? I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like it's elite boutique versus middle market bank. But I do want to. I mean, that is really good validation though, in that it's the exact same bank and exact same group 1 year apart, and you went from being rejected the first time to them accepting the second time. Was that like? I am curious though, like how was that experience interviewing with the same group 2 times in a row? Because a lot of students sometimes ask me like, hey, so if I applied last year and I got rejected, does that mean that I have no shot again with that firm or that group if I apply again? And obviously, in your case, the answer is no, it doesn't, right? But like, did that ever come up when you recruited with them the second time? Like, did they remember you or were like, oh, what are you doing here again?
So no, it didn't. Nobody that interviewed me the first time interviewed me the second time, which was, I don't know, it might have just been, it was a difference in timeline. I think that was the biggest thing. So the first time I was in sort of the standard process, and this second time I was in an accelerated timeline. I have no idea why the difference is or what they changed about the process and what led to that difference in timing. Yes, sure. I guess I mean, yeah, exactly.
Usually they'll put the higher priority candidates in the more accelerated timeline because they want to get to you before the other banks get to you, right?
Yeah.
But okay, so you were in the accelerated timeline this time.
So interviewers. Yeah, so there are different people interviewing me. It did come up that I had interviewed in the previous year, but it wasn't too big of an issue. I would say it was a concern of mine that like I was interviewing for the same bank, same group. Um, but ultimately, it came down to this. Like, if you're going in to a recruiting cycle in a different year and you have nothing different, or there's literally nothing different about you, that's when you should be the most worried. Um, but I knew that the first time I recruited, it wasn't like the best version of myself or the most qualified version of myself.
Yeah.
And so when I was interviewing with them this most recent cycle, I was confident that I had improved substantially.
Mm.
And so if it ever came up, it was more of sort of a, just a conversation piece. Like, hey, I interviewed with you guys last year, and I understand what my weaknesses were at that point. I think that's one of the biggest things. If you're gonna continue, or if you're gonna try to go for the same group and same organization twice in a row, you have to know what your weaknesses were that first time and be able to prove that you've improved on yourself in some manner. And I knew that that was the case for myself, so it didn't really concern me all that much.
Yep. That's really, really good advice. I usually like to end these interviews on by asking you for a piece of advice, but I think you just kind of gave a really good one. So, um, in fact, if you're able to, in an interview, acknowledge what your weaknesses were, but also be able to demonstrate how you've actually worked on those weaknesses since the last time you met, and how you've been able to overcome that. One, that shows humility and self-awareness. Because a lot of people don't even know what they did wrong. Like when they get rejected, they just get rejected and they're like,
Yeah,
I don't know why I got rejected, or they blame
yeah,
everything around them except for themselves. Like, oh, it was just like there was COVID or all these excuses, right? Like,
yeah,
but having the self-awareness and humility, like people love that. But then more importantly, they want to see like, hey, everyone's got weaknesses, but like, what are you gonna do about it, right?
yeah, yeah,
Not just saying, oh, and then so I went and worked on it, but like show, don't tell, like actually being able to point to real things that you've done as opposed to just like, so then I went and try to get better at this. Well, I don't know what that means, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so that's awesome, man. That's amazing. Obviously, great outcome in the end. I mean, ending up by Guggenheim from Case Western. I mean, are you the first person who's done that, or have other people from your school gone to Guggenheim before?
So it's interesting. We had I basically, this just goes to show you the importance of networking and knowing the right people. We had an alumni at William Blair, and he moved over to Guggenheim, and I had initially uh, started the conversation with him when he was at Blair,
Mhm.
kept in touch, found out he went to Guggenheim, kept in touch with him. I really enjoyed talking to him. And so, even if he had stayed at Blair, I would have kept in touch with him there. Just happened he went to Guggenheim, and we were able to keep up the conversation and move forward in that process. So,
Got it. So you nurtured that relationship over time, which
yeah,
we didn't really talk about, and that's a whole other conversation I'm not going to dive into right now. But
yep,
it's really, really important to nurture your relationships. It's not just like a one-time thing. Hey, hit them up for a coffee chat or informational call, and then like expect that something's going to happen. Like no, that's, you have to really maintain and build a real relationship if you want to turn into something, right? So, but okay, that's fair. He lateraled over, but you're the one. You're probably the first person to break him directly um, whatever undergrad or I guess
yeah.
communication MSF. So that's a great accomplishment, man. So I mean, huge congrats on that. Um, I guess let's wrap it up, guys. If you've been listening to this, I mean, geez, I have so many takeaways from this call. Uh, I I think like Pavan gave a lot of really, really detailed and good advice on really all aspects of recruiting, right? Whether it's the importance of having better credentials, which will just make your life easier in every other area, whether it's networking or interviewing. I think like that's really the foundation of everything you do in recruiting, right? To like networking the right way, right? Both in terms of being able to think outside the box in terms of who you network with, not only sticking to just alumni, especially if you come from a school that doesn't have a whole lot of alumni on Wall Street, to like asking better questions during those conversations and having the right mindset and the right approach to the importance of your delivery when it comes to your interview answers, whether it's your behaviors, your technicals. I mean, there's so many things we talked about. But if you are currently struggling with any of these things, or you've been trying to do all these things on your own, or maybe you're even like Pavan, like you already been through the recruiting process once, and it just didn't work out for you, and you want to have a second crack at it, but you know this is probably going to be your last shot. Like whatever it may be, if any of this resonated with you and you feel like, hey, I want the type of help that I've been hearing about on this interview, then I want to encourage you to reach out and schedule a free strategy session with our team. And on the strategy session, we'll just talk to you, ask you some questions. It's that call that Pavan had with Jen in the first place, where um, we'll try to understand what your recruiting goals are, what challenges you currently have, and what do you even need help with. Because it's not a one size fits all approach. Everybody's different, right? You might not even go to the same school. You might go to a totally different school, and like the approach might have to change. But the point is, figure out where you're at, and then we can kind of put our heads together and game plan and strategize on, what the best approach would be and how we may or may not be able to help you along the way. Even if we can't help you, sometimes we talk to people and we're like, we're not the best fit to help. We'll still at least just give you some advice and some additional clarity on what's working and what's not working, right? So you can still take that and go out and implement on your own if you want. But oftentimes people think that they want to work with us, in which case we could talk about that as well. So if that's interesting to you and that's something that you want to explore further, again, you can book this free strategy session by going on our website, www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you guys, all right, and hopefully helping you guys along this journey. So with that, Pavan, I want to thank you for taking the time. We've been going for almost an hour, I think, and so This is one of our longer interviews because, again, you brought a lot of good stuff, and it was I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this, and I really appreciate you for doing that and just being so willing to share. And again, super happy for you on your outcome. Excited to see what you're able to do, not this summer, but next summer at Guggenheim, and all the success that you have ahead of you, man. So definitely let's stay in touch and don't be a stranger. And you're always part of the family now that you're part of Wall Street Mastermind. So
yeah, definitely. Thanks, and I'll definitely make sure to keep in touch and stay around.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sam.
absolutely. All right, guys. That'll be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And we'll be back with more of these interviews for you guys in the near future. All right. Thanks. Talk soon. Bye.